are moments in life you never forget. Not because they were beautiful, but because they were the beginning of everything that came after. The best and the hardest, all at once. This is my story, and it is called Love in Iris. If you are not following the channel yet, follow now, because this story goes all the way to the end, and you will not want to miss a single part. My name is Lily. I am 27 years old. I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, and I am a model. I did not come from money. My father, Bill, is the pastor of a Baptist church on the east side of town, and my mother, Ruth, is a seamstress who has sewn every costume for the church Christmas pageant since 1992. We always had enough, but enough was never extra. I started modeling at 18 years old without telling my family, telling my mother I was taking an art photography class at a community college downtown. In our house, vanity was treated like a character flaw. So I learned early to live with one foot in each world, the world I showed them and the world I was building alone. Back then, I had 14,000 followers on Instagram, which for Savannah in 2019 was a decent number. But I knew it was nothing compared to the girls in New York and Los Angeles that I followed every night before falling asleep. I used to look at their careers with a kind of longing that actually hurt a little. In early March of 2019, I got a rejection that hit me harder than I expected. It was a national cosmetics campaign, the kind of thing that would have given me real visibility beyond Georgia. The email arrived on a Thursday morning while I was in a studio downtown, the flash of a strobe light going off in my face, and I read it in the corner of my eye on my phone. We appreciate your interest, but will be moving forward with another direction. 7 words to dismantle 3 months of expectation. I remember the photographer asked me to smile at exactly that moment, and I smiled. That is the kind of thing you learn in this profession. To smile when everything inside you is chaos. I finished the shoot, folded my clothes, picked up my bag, and walked out without telling anyone. My phone buzzed as I was leaving the studio. It was my mother, Ruth. I looked at her name on the screen for about 3 seconds and did not answer. Not because I did not want to talk to her. It was just that on that particular day, I did not have the energy to be who she expected me to be. My mother calls every Sunday morning, sends a Bible verse every day, and when I was not doing well, she always heard it in my voice. And then it became a long conversation about faith and purpose that I was not in the mood to have. There is something about me that I never told many people. I have a small scar on my chin from a car accident I had at 16 years old. Nothing serious, 5 stitches, a small mark that stayed. In every shoot, I asked the makeup artist to cover it with contour. It became an automatic habit, like covering anything I did not want people to see right away. That same night, lying in bed in my apartment in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, I opened my phone gallery by accident and stopped on a photo. It was me and Finn, my ex-fiancé. We had been engaged for 2 years, and I had broken it off 6 months before that March, without giving anyone a real explanation. The whole family was still waiting for an answer I did not know how to give. I looked at the photo for about 3 seconds and deleted it. Finn was everything my family wanted for me. An engineer, well-mannered, good family, attended the same church as my father. He loved me in the most honest way I have ever seen one person love another. It was just that I loved him back in a way that never gave me a fever, you know? Like something was missing that I could not name. And I kept pushing that feeling down for 2 years until I could not anymore. My biggest contract up to that point had been a regional mattress campaign that I made a point of never showing anyone. Not because it was embarrassing, but because it was exactly the size of my life at that period, and that size did not fit what I imagined for myself. I was 27 years old, living alone, paying my own bills, but walking around with the constant feeling that I was in the wrong part of my own story. I also had an anonymous Twitter account that nobody knew was mine. Created 2 years before. No photo, no name. It was the only place where I wrote what I actually thought about everything. About my family, about the modeling industry, about this double life I was living. It was like an open diary that nobody knew was mine, or at least that is what I thought. It was 1 week after that rejection that an email arrived from my agency. A jewelry campaign for a luxury brand out of Atlanta. 2 days of shooting in a studio downtown Savannah. Good money, big client. I accepted before I finished reading the email. I did not know it yet, but that email was going to change everything in my life, and not for the reason I was imagining. It was a Monday, March 11th of 2019. I arrived at the studio at 8 o'clock in the morning, downtown Savannah, a quiet street just off Broughton Street. The place was beautiful, that kind of studio with high ceilings and natural light pouring through tall windows. I have a habit of arriving early to jobs, something I picked up at the beginning of my career, getting there before everyone else and reading the room before anything starts. I introduced myself to the crew, met the photographer, a woman named Renee, experienced and direct, the kind of professional who does not waste time. She showed me the campaign pieces, jewelry from an Atlanta brand, necklaces, rings, elaborate gold earrings. It was the kind of work I genuinely liked, beautiful product, clean art direction. I went to the dressing room to get ready. That is where it happened. I was sitting in the chair in front of the mirror, the makeup artist working on my face, when the door opened and a woman walked in with a bag on her shoulder and a coffee in her hand. She did not make a scene, did not announce herself, walked in like someone who already knew the space. I looked at her reflection in the mirror and looked away quickly. Her name was Maya, 31 years old, olive skin, dark hair pulled back in the most casual way possible. She had a way of taking up space without needing to demand attention. That kind of calm that belongs to someone who has nothing left to prove. I found it irritating at first. That kind of calm can look like arrogance when you do not know the person yet. We spent the first 20 minutes side by side in the dressing room, each getting ready at our own mirror, and we exchanged nothing more than a good morning. But the mirrors were parallel, and every now and then our eyes would meet in the reflection without meaning to. A fraction of a second, and then each of us would look away. That happened about 4 times before we went out to the set. In the middle of the shoot, Maya's phone vibrated. She picked it up, read whatever was there, and for half a second her face changed. It was not dramatic, not tears, not anything that anyone else in the room would have caught. But I caught it. She put the phone back in her pocket and returned to her position without saying a word. I kept thinking about that for the rest of the day without understanding why. There was a third model working that day. Cassie, 26 years old, a colleague from the same agency as me. We had known each other for a while, started with the agency in the same year. Cassie was talkative, always had something to say, and that day she was more observant than usual. I noticed her watching me and Maya a few times during the shoot, but I did not think much of it. On the second day of the campaign, Renee decided to shoot a few photos with me and Maya together, complimentary jewelry pieces, mirrored poses. We were close to each other for hours on that set. And it was during one of those shots that something small happened that for some reason I have never been able to forget. Maya reached over to adjust a necklace that had twisted during my pose. A practical thing, completely professional, took maybe 5 seconds at most. But her hand stayed 1 second longer than necessary before letting go. It was nothing, technically, but I felt it. And when she pulled her hands back, neither of us said anything, and the shoot continued. During the lunch break on that second day, I went to get coffee in the back room, and Maya was already there. We started talking about the work, about the photographer, about the brand. It was a simple conversation, just industry small talk. But when Renee called everyone back to set, I looked at my phone and 40 minutes had passed. I had not noticed the time moving at all. On the last day of the campaign, when everything was nearly wrapped and the crew was starting to break down the set, Maya walked past me and asked if I wanted to grab a coffee before heading out. Something casual, no weight in her voice at all. I wanted to say I had somewhere to be. I had nowhere to be. I said yes. We went to a coffee shop on Jones Street, about 10 minutes from the studio on foot. We stayed there for 2 hours. I got home that evening and realized I had gone 2 full hours without looking at my phone once. That had never happened to me before. Never. And I lay in bed that night trying to understand what exactly had happened in that coffee shop. But I could not put it into words. Not yet. In that coffee shop on Jones Street, we sat at a small table in the back. One of those tables with wooden chairs that creak when you shift your weight. It was almost 12:30 in the afternoon. The place was busy with the lunch crowd, the sound of cups and conversation, and that good smell of fresh coffee that some places just get right. And even with all of that around us, I only heard her. Maya talked in a way I was not used to hearing in the modeling industry. No pretense, no positioning, no talking badly about people to seem funny or relatable. She said what she thought directly, but without sharpness. I had been so used to people saying what they thought I wanted to hear, that her straightforwardness sounded strange at first. Then it sounded really good. We talked about the regional modeling market, about the pressure of maintaining an image, about the feeling of being judged for what you look like rather than who you are. I found myself sharing things I would not normally share with someone I had just met. Not about my family, not about Finn, but about myself in a way I rarely allowed. When I got home and looked at my phone, there were 18 notifications stacked up. 2 hours without checking the screen. I stood in my kitchen processing that. It was not anxiety. It was not forgetfulness. I had simply not missed it. And that small realization stayed with me, turning over in my head before I fell asleep. The campaign wrapped on a Wednesday. On Thursday morning, the photographer Renee created a group message with me, Maya, and 2 other crew members to coordinate the contract paperwork with the brand. Standard stuff, nothing unusual. Except that same day, Maya messaged me directly, outside the group, just asking if I had liked the photos. A simple thing. I replied. She replied. And that conversation never really stopped. Within a week, we were messaging every day. There was always a work-related excuse at the beginning, a question about the agency, a studio recommendation, something practical. But the conversations always ended up somewhere else entirely. Movies, food, behind-the-scenes stories that made me laugh out of nowhere. My friend Carol, who lives in the same building as me, caught me laughing at my phone one afternoon and asked who I was so happy talking to. I said it was a work thing. She did not look very convinced. There was a Saturday afternoon when Maya invited me over to look at some high-resolution photos Renee had sent over. We met at her apartment, in a building on East Jones Street, one of those beautiful old Savannah buildings with the original hardwood floors and the tall windows. The apartment was simple and filled with light, and in the second bedroom there was an easel with a half-finished watercolor. I stopped in the doorway and asked if it was hers. She said yes, with a naturalness that surprised me, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to keep something like that in a back room without showing anyone. I stood looking at that watercolor for a while. It was a landscape of a city I did not recognize. Cool colors, a delicate hand. I asked where that city was. She said it was Nashville, where she had grown up. She said it simply, without drama, but then went quiet for a moment, like someone weighing how much to continue. She did not continue, and I did not ask. But that moment of quiet stayed with me. We spent the afternoon looking through the photos, commenting on each one, laughing at our expressions. At some point, I noticed that the distance between us on the couch had gotten smaller without either of us having made any deliberate move. It had just happened. I noticed and did not do anything to change it. On a Thursday toward the end of March, we were texting when my mother sent a Bible verse through the family group chat. She sends one every single day without fail. That day, it was something about straight paths and right choices. I read it, silenced the notification, and kept talking to Maya. But that verse stayed in my head in a way I did not expect. Not guilt, exactly. Something stranger that I did not have a name for yet. I started noticing that I dressed differently on the days I was going to see Maya. Nothing dramatic, but I would hold up an extra option in the mirror, spend more time on my hair. It was a small thing, but I knew it was happening, and I pretended to myself it was just coincidence. We are very good at lying to ourselves when we want to be. There was a launch event for a new collection on a Friday evening at a venue in the Starland district. I did not know Maya would be there. When I saw her across the room, something shifted inside me in a way that caught me completely off guard. I stopped mid-sentence talking to someone else, and from across the room I saw Cassie watching me. She had seen the whole thing. After that event in the Starland district, I spent 2 days avoiding thinking about what I had felt when I saw Maya across the room. I am good at that, taking an uncomfortable thought and pushing it into a dark corner of my mind and pretending it is not there. I did it for 2 full days. On the 3rd day, I stopped being able to. Cassie messaged me the morning after the event. It was a Monday, early, just past 7:30 in the morning. The message said, "Hey stranger, everything okay? Saw you guys there last night." With a heart emoji at the end. 3 words and an emoji, and I stared at that message for way too long for it to be normal. I replied with a hey and a smile and let the conversation die. But my stomach turned. At work, Cassie had always been that kind of colleague who seems like a friend, but you never quite know where you stand. We started with the agency the same year, did some jobs together, and she had always been friendly with me. But friendliness and trust are different things, and I had never confused them. That message reminded me of that. Maya and I kept talking every day. The work excuses got thinner and thinner until we stopped bothering to invent them at all. It was just conversation, about everything and nothing. One afternoon, she sent me a photo of a pasta recipe she was attempting that had gone completely wrong, and I laughed so hard, my downstairs neighbor knocked on the ceiling. That was the level of nonsense we were exchanging, and it felt better than anything I had experienced in a long time. My agent Sandra, a woman of 42 who had been working with me since the beginning, called me on a Tuesday to talk about new contracts. In the middle of the conversation, she mentioned a test for a conservative local brand, a big established Savannah family business, and said it was important that I maintain an impeccable image on social media. She used that exact word, impeccable. I said, of course, absolutely, without understanding yet the weight that word would carry in the weeks ahead. During that same period, I started going to Maya's apartment more often. There was always a practical reason: looking at photos, exchanging a book recommendation, borrowing something she had mentioned. But the truth was, I was looking for any excuse to be in that apartment on East Jones Street, with its good light and its cat named August curled up on the couch. One Wednesday evening, we were sitting on Maya's couch looking at old photos from her career when she mentioned, almost in passing, that she had come to Savannah from Nashville to start over. She said it just like that, start over, without going into any detail. I did not ask what she was leaving behind, but that phrase stayed with me. Start over is too big a phrase to use lightly. My mother Ruth kept sending Bible verses every morning through the group chat. On a Thursday in April, the verse was about truth, and how the truth sets you free. I read it while I was at Maya's apartment waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, and the irony of it hit me in a way I had not expected. I silenced my phone and put it in my pocket without responding. I was starting to notice that conversations with Maya took me to places I had never reached with anyone else. It was not just what we talked about, it was what I was able to say. With her, I did not have to assemble a version of myself before opening my mouth. That was new enough to feel exciting and terrifying at the same time. On a Friday in early May, my friend Carol ran into me in the hallway of our building and said out of nowhere that I seemed different. Not different bad, different light. I asked what she meant. She shrugged and said I seemed like I was enjoying something and that she had not seen that look on my face in a long time. I did not know what to say and walked into my apartment laughing to myself, which probably confirmed everything she was already thinking. But alongside that lightness came something I had not expected. A restlessness. Because I was starting to understand that what I felt around Maya did not fit into any category I had used in my life up to that point. And when something does not fit your categories, you have 2 options. You either create a new category, or you pretend the thing does not exist. I chose the second option for a few more weeks, but there was one night in May, a regular Monday, when Maya sent me a casual message about a documentary she had watched alone and thought of me. A small message, meaningless on the surface. Except I sat there looking at that message for much longer than it deserved, and something inside me started asking a question I was not ready to answer. That documentary message stayed in my head for days. It was not the content of the message. It was the detail that she had watched it alone and thought of me. Something small, almost silly. But that is exactly the kind of thing you trip over without seeing it coming, and I tripped hard. I went to sleep that Monday and woke up Tuesday with a strange feeling in my chest. It was not anxiety, not that familiar, uncomfortable thing I knew well. It was almost the opposite of that. A lightness that scared me because I did not know where it was coming from. And when you do not know where a good thing is coming from, that can be more unsettling than a bad thing that has a clear explanation. That week I was scrolling through my phone on a slow afternoon when a video appeared in my feed. I had not searched for it. The algorithm just brought it. It was a woman telling her story, about how she had reached her early 30s without fully understanding who she was, without being able to put a name to what she felt. I watched it all the way through without blinking. Then I watched it again. Then I closed the app. Then I opened it again. And I lay on my back staring at the ceiling for a stretch of time I honestly could not measure. I was 27 years old, and I thought I knew myself reasonably well. I knew what I liked to eat. I knew what kind of work made me happy. I knew I could not sleep with noise, and that black coffee made me irritable. Those things I knew. But there was a part of me I had learned not to look at directly, like when you look away from a bright light. I had gotten so good at looking away that the looking away had become the habit. On a Thursday that week, I was getting ready for a shoot when I stopped in front of my bathroom mirror. No makeup, no work clothes, no model smile. Just me. And for the first time in a long time, I looked at myself for real, without the hurry to move on from my own reflection. I stood there for a couple of minutes that felt much longer. And the question I had been avoiding for so long started rising in a way I could not push back down anymore. I spent the next 2 days giving Maya short replies. Fine. That is great. Huh. Talk later. She noticed, because Maya always noticed. But she did not push anything. Just sent a message one Saturday afternoon that said, I am here. No rush. 4 words. I read it, put my phone face down on the bed, and went to take a shower. I cried a little under the water without fully understanding why. That kind of crying that comes before the answers, not after them. That week I opened the anonymous Twitter account I had been running for 2 years. I usually wrote there when I was processing something difficult. I wrote a long post. No name, no identification. I wrote about the feeling of meeting someone and sensing that they were opening a door inside you that you did not know existed in your own house. I did not mention Maya. I did not mention anything specific. But anyone who knew me well enough could have recognized it. I had not been sleeping properly for a week. I was lying awake rereading old conversations with Maya through a completely new lens, every message carrying a different weight now, a different meaning. One thing is feeling something, and not knowing what it is. Another thing is understanding what it is, and having to decide what to do with it. I had moved from the first phase to the second, without noticing exactly when the crossing had happened. On a Friday that week, I called Carol late at night. She answered half asleep and asked what was wrong. I stayed quiet for about 10 seconds. She waited. I said I was confused about a situation and did not know how to handle it. She asked if it was work. I said no. She went quiet for a second and then said, Lily, you can tell me anything. You know that. I said I knew. And I did not tell her anything. I was not ready yet. There was a Sunday when my mother called at her usual time, 8 o'clock in the morning. I answered this time. The conversation was normal, about the week, about the church, about a new recipe she had tried. Near the end of the call, she said out of nowhere that she had been praying for me a lot lately. I asked why specifically. She said she could not explain it, just a feeling she had. My mother always had that way of knowing things before she knew that she knew them. I hung up the phone and stared at nothing for a long while. I spent that entire Sunday at home without going out, without answering messages. I picked up a notebook I had not used in months and tried to write down what I was feeling in plain concrete words, no metaphor, no poetry. It took me almost an hour to manage one honest sentence. When I wrote it, I looked at it for a long time. It was simple, it was direct, and it changed a lot of things. On Monday morning, I woke up with a strange calm. Not resolution, not courage quite yet. It was the calm of someone who had been running and finally stopped to breathe. I picked up my phone, opened the conversation with Maya, and typed, "Can I see you today?" She responded in under 2 minutes. Of course. And I got out of bed knowing something was going to be different from that point forward, without knowing exactly how. We met that Monday afternoon at a small park near my apartment in Ardsley Park. It was a June afternoon in Savannah, one of those warm southern afternoons where the air is thick and the Spanish moss hangs completely still from the oak trees, and the whole city feels like it is moving slowly on purpose. Maya arrived with 2 coffees in a paper bag without me having asked for them. She just knew. We sat on a wooden bench under a large oak tree. I did not know where to start, so I did not start anywhere at all. I spent about 2 minutes watching the pigeons on the ground without saying anything. Maya sat quietly beside me, drinking her coffee. Without that urgency, most people have to fill silence with words. And that silence did not weigh anything. It was the first time in weeks I had felt outside my own apartment without wanting to be somewhere else. After a while, she spoke first. She did not ask what was going on, did not ask if I was okay. She said that Savannah had been hard for her in a way that still hurt sometimes. Said it looking straight ahead, like someone thinking out loud. I realized she was giving me something of herself before asking anything of me. That completely disarmed me. I did not ask what had been hard about Savannah, but she continued a little. She said she had come here to start over for real, that it had taken time to understand that starting over was not erasing. It was just beginning from a different place. She said it with a steadiness that I knew had cost something. You do not talk that way about things that were easy. We went quiet again for a while, and then she leaned her shoulder against mine, gently, without ceremony, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Not a hug, nothing grand, just the weight of her shoulder against mine. And that was enough to make me feel like I was about to cry without being able to explain to anyone, including myself, the exact reason why. I looked down and noticed our hands were close together on the bench, almost touching, but not quite. There was a small gap between our fingers that felt like a conscious choice by both of us. Like both of us knew that gap was there, and neither of us was in any hurry to cross it. I had never paid so much attention to such a small space in my life. I said, looking at the ground, that I was confused. I did not explain what about exactly. Just confused. Maya stayed quiet for a second, and then said that being confused was okay. The confusion was sometimes the beginning of a clarity that had not arrived yet. I laughed a little without meaning to. She asked why I was laughing. I said she talked like a character in a book. She said she read a lot. We laughed together, and that laughter released something that had been tight inside me for weeks. The afternoon stretched on, and we stayed on that bench until the sun dropped low. When she got up to leave, Maya looked at me and said with complete simplicity that she was doing well and hoped I was too, and that whenever I was ready to really talk, she would be there. No pressure, no expectation, just that. I said thank you, and she walked away down the sidewalk with her hands in her pockets. I stayed on the bench for another 10 minutes after she left, processing. The sun had almost disappeared, and the Savannah evening heat was settling in. that thick, warm air that never really cools down in June. I put my hands in my jacket pockets and realized I was smiling without having noticed. I stopped smiling when I noticed. Then I smiled again. I got home and turned my phone back on. It had been in my bag the whole time we were at the park. There was a message from Cassie. "Heard you and Maya have been hanging out a lot lately. That is so sweet," with a heart emoji. I read that message 3 times. On the surface, it was a friendly message, the kind a colleague sends. But I had known Cassie long enough to know she never sent anything without a reason. I stared at her message for a while, without knowing how to respond. Because behind that message there was something I could not quite define. An observation. A warning, maybe. A threat dressed up as kindness. I replied with a thanks and an emoji and closed the app, but my stomach stayed unsettled. That night, lying in bed, I looked at the ceiling for a long time. There were 2 things happening inside me simultaneously. Something good and new that I was learning not to run from, and something that I knew was going to complicate everything if I let it grow. And both of them were growing at the same time, without asking my permission. It was a Friday evening at the end of July 2019. Maya invited me over for dinner at her apartment. Something simple. She was going to cook pasta. I arrived at 7 o'clock with a bottle of sparkling grape juice because I do not drink, and she knew that. August, her cat, came to meet me at the door the way she always did, rubbing her head against my ankle. I had become a frequent enough visitor that the cat recognized me. We cooked together. Or more accurately, Maya cooked, and I sat on the kitchen counter, talking while she worked at the stove. There was low music playing in the background. That instrumental style she liked. Something calm and unhurried. The apartment smelled like garlic and olive oil, and that combination of smell with that music and that warm yellow kitchen light created an atmosphere I did not want to end. We ate sitting on the living room floor because Maya's table was too small, and she had books stacked all over it. 3 candles lit in the center, plates on the floor, August circling around us waiting for an opportunity. We spent the whole evening laughing about nothing, backstage stories, the strangest jobs each of us had ever done. I remember thinking in that moment that I was happy. Not relieved, not distracted. Actually happy. After dinner we turned on a movie. I do not remember the name of the movie because neither of us watched it. We kept talking over it, pausing it, rewinding, until the movie stopped mattering entirely, and we turned it off. It was almost 11 at night, and I knew I should leave, but I did not get up. Maya went to clear the plates from the living room, and I went to help. We ended up in the kitchen together, her washing, me drying, that domestic routine that felt too natural for 2 people who had only known each other since March. And it was there, standing with my back to her, drying a plate that had been dry for a while, that the words came out. I said, almost to myself, that I was scared of feeling what I was feeling. I had not planned it. It just came out. And when it came out, I kept staring at the plate in my hand like it was the most interesting thing in the room. The silence that followed lasted about 5 seconds that felt like much longer. Maya stopped washing. I heard the water turn off. She turned me around by the shoulder. Slowly, with one hand, no force at all. Just one hand on my shoulder turning me toward her. And when I faced her, she asked, in a low and steady voice, "What are you feeling, Lily?" No rush, like someone with all the time in the world. I tried to answer 3 times. The first attempt came out as half a sentence that made no sense. The second time I started talking about work, about pressure, about nothing at all. The third time I stopped in the middle, and the fourth attempt came out as something close to the truth. I said I did not really know who I was outside of the camera, and that around her I was discovering things about myself I had never had the courage to look at before. It was not elegant. It was not articulate. It came out crooked and incomplete. but it was honest. Maya looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything, and then she said very quietly that she had known that for a while, not with arrogance, not with the air of someone who had been waiting to be discovered, with a tenderness that completely undid me. I did not know what to say back, and she did not wait for me to say anything. She moved toward me slowly enough to be a question that leaves room for a no. And I closed my eyes before the contact, which I think was my answer. The kiss was gentle, brief, nothing dramatic. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, and it changed everything that came before it and everything that would come after. We stood in the kitchen for a moment, foreheads together, not saying anything, and then my phone buzzed on the counter beside us. The screen lit up. It was my mother, Ruth, calling at 11:30 at night, which she never did. I looked at her name on the screen and did not answer. Maya looked too and said nothing. But the two worlds, the one I was building and the one I had left outside the door, had gotten close enough to each other that I knew they were not going to stay separate much longer. I left Maya's apartment close to midnight. I walked to my car with that feeling of someone who has just landed after a very long flight. The thick July air of Savannah hit my face, and I stood on the sidewalk for a second looking up at the sky. There were no answers to anything yet, but it had happened, and now I had to decide what to do with that. The weeks that followed that night were the most beautiful and the most complicated I had ever lived at the same time. On the inside, I was different. There was a new lightness, a reason to get up in the morning that I had not felt in a long time. On the outside, I was still the same Lily everyone knew, going to shoots, answering emails, showing up to events. But something had shifted in the way I occupied spaces, and the people around me started noticing before I noticed myself. On a Monday in August, I was at a shoot in a studio in the Midtown neighborhood of Savannah, when Cassie arrived for the same job. We greeted each other normally, talked about the work, about the brand. But during the lunch break, while we were in the dressing room with 2 other girls, Cassie said out of nowhere that she had seen such a cute photo of 2 of our mutual friends together at a restaurant over the weekend. She did not mention any names. She did not need to. She looked directly at me while she said it. The other 2 girls did not catch the message. I caught every word of it. I did not say anything. I kept eating my lunch, looking at my plate. But inside something lit up that I had not expected. Not fear, anger. A small, controlled anger, the kind you swallow because you know the moment to speak is not that one. I finished lunch, went back to the set, and worked the rest of the day with the professionalism I had learned to maintain, even when everything inside me was unsettled. 2 days later, I got a call from my agent Sandra. She said she needed to see me in person, that there was an important matter to discuss. We scheduled a Thursday morning meeting at her office in a commercial building on Bull Street. I arrived on time, sat down in the chair across from her desk, and knew from the way she looked at me that the conversation was not going to be about a new contract. Sandra was direct. She always had been. She said the agency had received an anonymous email claiming that I was involved in a relationship that could compromise contracts with more conservative clients. There was no name in the email, no evidence of anything. But it had arrived, and she was obligated to tell me. She delivered the news carefully, without judgment in her tone, but the message was clear. She asked if there was anything I wanted to clarify. I sat in silence for about 8 seconds that felt like 8 minutes. I thought about Maya. I thought about my mother. I thought about everything I had built up to that point, and then I said that my personal life was in order and that my work had always spoken for itself. Sandra nodded, said she knew that, and closed the subject. I walked out of that office not knowing if I had made the right choice or simply delayed a conversation that needed to happen. I got home that Thursday and went straight to the bathroom mirror. I stood looking at myself for a while. And then I said out loud, just for myself, that I was not going to let anyone decide for me who I was allowed to be. It was not a beautiful speech. There was no audience. It was just me and the mirror and an honest anger I needed to release before swallowing it again. It helped more than I expected. I did not tell Maya about the anonymous email right away. I carried it alone for a few days. But the weight of it started showing up in our conversations without me meaning it to. Shorter replies, canceled plans with weak excuses. Maya did not ask anything for 3 days. On the 4th day, she sent a message that said, "You do not have to tell me what it is, but I can feel something is there. Just want you to know you can talk to me." I called her that night and told her everything. The email, the meeting with Sandra, what Cassie had done in the dressing room, the anger I had been sitting with. I talked without stopping for about 15 minutes. Maya listened without interrupting the way she always listened, completely present, not already thinking about her response while I was still speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said she was really sorry I was going through that, and that whatever decision I needed to make, she would respect. She did not promise anything beyond that, and that was exactly what I needed to hear. The problem was the outside world did not wait for me to finish processing. The following week, on a Tuesday afternoon, my cousin Deborah called me. We had not talked in months. She also worked in the events and fashion space in Savannah, so our paths crossed sometimes. She said she had run into Maya at a coffee shop downtown and they had chatted for a bit. Said Maya seemed like a really wonderful person. And then, without realizing what she was revealing, she mentioned that she had told Maya about my engagement to Finn. There was a silence on the line. My cousin asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I hung up and stood still, processing what that meant. Maya now knew about the engagement, and I had not told her. It was not a secret, it was not a lie, but it was a part of my story I had not yet found the right words to share. That evening I went to her apartment. When I arrived, she received me normally, no tension, no air of someone holding back a question. We talked for a while about other things, until I said I knew she had spoken with my cousin. Maya nodded. I asked if she wanted to know about Finn. She said, with that complete calm of hers, "Only if you want to tell me." I told her. I told her about the 2 years of engagement, about how hard I had tried, about that feeling of loving someone in a way that never gave me a fever. Maya listened without a single judgment. When I finished, she said something simple that stayed with me. She said that sometimes we spend years being fair to everyone around us and forget to be fair to ourselves. I did not respond. I just sat there looking at her, thinking that she had put into one sentence something I had not been able to put into words in years. It was in early October that I asked Maya for time. It was not a fight. There was no crying, no accusations from either side. It was a conversation on a Sunday afternoon in her apartment, with August asleep in Maya's lap and the afternoon light coming through the living room window. I said I needed some time to better understand what I was feeling before moving forward. That it was not her. It was me trying to organize an internal world that had been turned upside down for months. Maya listened to everything I said with that calm of hers, and when I finished, she said she respected that she would be there when I was ready. She did not beg. She did not bargain. She just said she would be there. I left her apartment that Sunday afternoon carrying more weight than I had arrived with, because asking for time was the most honest thing I could do in that moment, but honest does not mean easy. On the way back to my apartment, I walked past that park in Ardsley Park, where we had sat on the bench back in June. I did not look at the bench. I looked at the ground and kept walking. The days that followed were quiet in a way that hurt. The apartment was exactly the same as it had always been. Same organized mess. Same morning coffee routine. Same window with the same view. But the silence had taken on a shape, and the shape was Maya. The way she laughed, her low voice, the coffee she always made stronger than necessary whenever I came over. Those things stayed in the apartment even after she was gone from my daily life. One October evening, I opened Instagram without thinking, and Maya's profile appeared in the suggestions. I went in without following, without interacting. She had posted a photo 2 days before, a simple image, her at a coffee shop, smiling. A quiet smile, the kind that is not trying to convince anyone of anything. I looked at it for about 30 seconds and closed the app. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for a long time after that. I kept working. I did 2 shoots that month, attended a collection launch event for a new Savannah brand, smiled for cameras, shook hands, told everyone I was doing great. There was a photo from the March jewelry campaign that had circulated internally at the agency that I would sometimes stop and look at on my phone. Me and Maya, the complimentary jewelry pieces, the mirrored poses. Renee had captured something in those photos that went beyond the product. Anyone who looked at them carefully enough could see it. On a night in late October, around 2 a.m, I opened the anonymous Twitter account. I wrote a long post. No names, no identifying details. But I wrote about opening a door inside yourself and not being able to pretend anymore that the door does not exist. About spending years being fair to everyone around you and forgetting to be fair to yourself. I used without realizing it almost the same words Maya had used weeks before. I posted it and closed the app without thinking about it again that night. What I did not know was that my Aunt Margaret, my mother's younger sister, used Twitter regularly, and my Aunt Margaret had known me since I was born, had watched me grow up, had been present through every chapter of my life up close. She read that post that week. She recognized the writing style, the details, the tone. And she told my mother, Ruth. It was on a Thursday afternoon that my father, Bill, showed up at my apartment door. Without calling first, without any warning. I opened the door, and there he was holding a container of food my mother had made. He did not say anything. He did not come inside. He just held out the container, looked at me for 1 second with those eyes of his that had always known more than his mouth let on, and walked back down the hallway without turning around. I stood in the doorway holding that container for a long time without being able to move. I went inside, set the container on the kitchen table, and sat down in a chair. And I cried. I cried in a way I had not cried in months, that deep kind of crying that comes from the place you normally keep locked. It was not the food itself. It was not the gesture alone. It was my father's silence. It was him showing up without demanding an explanation, without bringing a Bible verse, without bringing judgment. Just the container. That said more than any conversation we could have had. My mother did not call that day. Or the next day. I knew she knew something, but I did not know exactly how much. I spent that week in a state of waiting that was worse than any confrontation. Because when the conversation does not come, you have no idea what size it is going to be when it finally arrives, and my mother was capable of a long silence when she was working through something significant. It was on a Friday that week that I got a message from Finn. Simple, direct, no drama. It said, "Hey, heard you are still in Savannah. Everything okay over there?" I stopped when I read it. Finn had not messaged me in months. We had ended the engagement without fighting, without ugliness, but also without staying in touch. That message arrived at such a specific moment that I sat there wondering if it was coincidence or if someone had said something to him. I did not reply that day. I kept it there, one more thing in the weight I was already carrying. It was nearly 3 months since that Sunday afternoon when I had walked out of Maya's apartment. 3 months of internal silence, of work as an anchor, of more nights awake than asleep. I had written a lot in a notebook during that period, trying to organize what I was feeling into plain words, and on one night in December, rereading what I had written, I realized I had spent those 3 months being fair to everyone around me. To my mother, to my work, to the expectations of everyone else. And on not one page of that notebook had I been fair to myself. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay in the dark thinking about what I was going to do with that. It was on a Friday in December of 2019 that the jewelry brand published the campaign officially. The photos went live on the brand's Instagram, on their website, and in several retail locations in Atlanta and Savannah. They were beautiful photographs. Renee had done exceptional work. And in some of them, Maya and I appeared together. The complementary pieces, the mirrored poses, the looks that the camera had caught during those 2 days back in March. Someone looking at them as a customer would see two models in a beautiful editorial. Someone who knew the story would see something else entirely. It did not take long. On a Saturday morning, a local Savannah gossip account with nearly 30,000 followers reposted one of the photos in their stories. They did not say anything explicit, just reposted it with an eye emoji. But anyone who followed that account and knew the industry understood the implication. In the comments section of the brand's original post, people started tagging each other, pulling others in to look. That particular internet movement that starts small and grows fast without anyone being able to stop it. I found out through a message from Carol on Saturday around noon. She sent the link with a "Hey Lily, have you seen this?" I had seen it. I stared at my screen for a long time without knowing exactly what to feel. It was not surprise. Deep down, I had always known those photos held something that any careful eye would catch. It was more like a confirmation that the outside world was arriving whether I had given it permission or not. I did not call anyone that Saturday. I did not reply to Carol, did not open social media, did not call Maya. I made coffee, sat by the window of my apartment, and looked at the street for hours. Savannah on a Saturday in December has that end-of-year energy. People on the sidewalks, Christmas decorations on the storefronts, along Broughton Street, that heat that mixes with the occasional cool breeze that passes through. Life was moving out there with a normalcy I found almost funny given everything that was happening inside me. That same Saturday afternoon, I finally replied to Finn's message that had been sitting unanswered for weeks. I wrote that I was doing well, thanks for asking. He replied within minutes. Said he had heard some things through the circles that Savannah inevitably creates, that he was not reaching out for gossip. He was reaching out because he genuinely cared about what I was going through. I looked at his message for a while, and then I replied that he could call whenever he wanted. He called 30 minutes later, and we talked for almost 2 hours. Finn was not what I expected him to be in that conversation. I had been bracing for discomfort, for that heavy silence of someone who had been left without a real explanation. But he was direct. He said he had always known that something he did not understand was happening with me during the engagement, and that he was not angry, he was concerned. He asked if I was okay for real. I said I was learning to be. He said that was enough. And in that moment, I understood that Finn was going to be one of the rare people who could stay in my life without needing me to explain every detail. I hung up the phone with a strange and genuine sense of gratitude. Sunday passed quietly. Monday was work. Tuesday and Wednesday too. I kept moving through the days with the same routine as always, but with that thing growing inside me that I knew did not fit anymore in the size I was trying to keep it. It was December of 2019. I was reaching the end of a year that had turned me completely upside down in ways I was still working to fully process. On Friday that week, nearly 3 months after that Sunday afternoon, when I had walked out of Maya's apartment, I was lying in bed with my phone resting on my chest and the lights off. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. I was in that state between sleep and thought when the phone vibrated. I picked it up without looking at who it was. And when I saw the name on the screen, I sat up in the dark. It was Maya. The message said, "I watched that documentary again tonight. Still think you would love it. I am doing well. I hope you are too." I read it once, read it again, read it a third time as if the words might change between readings. It was 11:47 at night on a Friday in December, and that simple message carried the weight of everything that had not been said in the past 3 months. It was not a demand, not pressure. It was a door, not thrown wide open, not shut, just slightly ajar. I started typing, deleted it, started again with different words, deleted that too. I sat with my thumb hovering over the blank screen for a stretch of time I honestly could not measure, because that reply was not just a reply to Maya. It was a reply to myself, to everything I had been through that year, to everything I had learned about who I was, and about the size of courage that being honest with yourself actually requires. And then the phone vibrated again. This time it was my mother, Ruth. Her message said only, "Lily, I need to talk to you." I stopped. I sat there looking at the screen with both messages open at the same time, Maya's at the top and my mother's below it. The woman I loved and the family I was afraid of losing. Both of them there, in that rectangle of light in the dark of my bedroom, waiting for something from me. I took a slow breath. I set the phone down on the bed beside me. I got up, walked to the window, and stood there looking out at the street for a moment. Savannah at night has that quiet that is not empty. It is full of things happening somewhere else, and I knew in that moment that whatever I did next was going to define the beginning of a different story. Not the end of anything. The beginning of something I did not have a name for yet, but that I was no longer willing to keep waiting on. I walked back to the bed. I picked up the phone, and I started typing. The story of Lily has come this far. What she typed, which message she answered first, and what happened after that, that is another story. But this one you already know how it went. And if you stayed all the way to the end, thank you for being here. This was love in Iris,